It was the middle of a searing July afternoon when the screech of golf cart tires on gravel split the quiet like a gunshot. I looked up from my welding mask, sweating buckets under the sun, just in time to see her, Karen, in all her glory, barreling toward my property line like a soap opera villain late for a court date. She had the holy trinity of HOA warfare strapped to her chest. A laminated clipboard, a neon whistle, and a fanny pack crammed so tight with papers it looked ready to pop. Before I could even set my welding torch down, she was standing at my fence, red-faced and already mid-screech. "You have exactly 24 hours to remove that eyesore of a tractor," she shrieked, stabbing her pen at the battered but powerful machine parked proudly in my front yard. Behind her, a couple of her usual minions hovered awkwardly, clutching iced lattes and trying not to melt in the heat. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so jaw-droppingly stupid. Because that tractor, the one she was calling an eyesore, wasn't just an old piece of machinery. It was the skeleton frame of the state governor's official 4th of July parade float, currently classified as a state project under my care. And if Karen got her way, she wouldn't just ruin my month. She'd ignite a political firestorm she couldn't even begin to imagine. I walked over calmly, wiping my hands on a rag as Karen puffed herself up like a rooster ready for a fight. She didn't ask. She didn't reason. She commanded. "This is a violation of the HOA bylaws. Section 7.2. All visible machinery must be concealed or removed to preserve neighborhood aesthetic. Consider this your first and final warning." She said it with the confidence of someone who thought the world actually worked like her Facebook HOA group. I stayed silent, watching her dig her own grave with every word, while a slow, dangerous grin pulled at the corner of my mouth. "See, 2 months ago, I got a visit from the State Parade Committee. Turns out someone high up had seen the Christmas float I built for the local VFW and decided I was the guy to build the governor's float this year. It was supposed to be a masterpiece, an enormous tribute to first responders, complete with a rotating firefighter statue, hidden lighting systems, and a fold-out stage for the governor's speech at the parade's finale. They needed discretion. They needed someone outside the public eye. And they needed it fast. I agreed on one condition. I work from my own property. No nosy city contractors. No bureaucrats breathing down my neck. Just me, my tools, and a tight deadline. It was perfect until now. Karen had no clue. To her, it was just an ugly tractor blocking the pristine view of her new yoga studio she built illegally in her backyard. The tractor's paint was chipped, the tires worn, but it was the heart of the entire float operation. Without it, there would be no platform, no movement, no parade finale. Karen wasn't just picking a fight with a neighbor, she was about to sabotage the entire state parade. I tried, just once, to throw her a lifeline. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice even, "you really don't want to mess with this. It's a lot bigger than you realize. Trust me." I could practically see the gears grinding in her brain, fueled by a lifetime of HOA meetings, Pinterest boards, and daytime TV courtroom dramas. She let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh please. Don't play hero. Rules are rules. And your little tractor isn't special. It's coming down, or I'll escalate this to the board, the city, and even the mayor if I have to." Behind her, one of her minions muttered something about being late for tennis lessons. I couldn't blame them. The heat was brutal, and Karen was like a human flamethrower of bad energy. I looked past her at the tractor gleaming stubbornly in the sun. Welded to its frame were the early structures of the float, a pair of gleaming aluminum towers, a heavy-duty battery pack for the light show, and underneath, the custom hydraulic lifts that would eventually unfold the tribute sculptures. If she managed to move it even an inch without proper handling, it could collapse or worse, crack the whole rig beyond repair. Karen planted a hot pink, final warning, sticker on my gate like she was serving divine justice, then spun on her heel and stormed back to her golf cart. As she revved the little engine like she was escaping a war zone, she yelled over her shoulder, "24 hours! Then enforcement action begins." Dust kicked up in her wake, clouding the air as I stood there, heart pounding, not with fear but with the sharp, electric anticipation of what was coming. I knew exactly what Karen was about to unleash. She thought this was some petty neighborhood spat she could win with threats and passive-aggressive emails. She didn't know she was poking a bear that had the entire governor's office backing it. And the best part? Every single move she made from here on out would be caught on my security cameras, documented, time-stamped, and forwarded straight to the state attorney's office. All I had to do was let her hang herself with her own arrogance. That night, as I double-checked the locks on the gates and powered up the security floodlights, I found myself smiling in the dark. I wasn't worried, not even a little, because while Karen thought she was writing my eviction notice, she was actually writing her own ticket to the biggest public humiliation this neighborhood, or maybe even the whole state, had ever seen. And by the time the dust settled, the only thing uglier than my eyesore tractor would be the viral footage of Karen's face when she realized exactly who she had messed with. By the time the clock struck midnight, I had already backed up all the camera feeds, filed a quiet report with the parade security team, and prepared my ace in the hole. A sealed letter from the governor's legal counsel affirming that any interference with my property would be considered interference with a state-sponsored government project. A felony offense, punishable by fines, jail time, or both. I left the letter sitting neatly by the front door, right under the security camera. I didn't even have to ring her doorbell. If Karen wanted a war, she could come and collect her first battle wound herself. Tomorrow was going to be legendary. And for once, I couldn't wait for the HOA to come knocking. The next morning, just as the sun started to bake the asphalt, I knew something was wrong before I even stepped outside. The air had that heavy, humming tension, like right before a thunderstorm hit. Sure enough, when I opened the barn doors and looked out across the front yard, my heart dropped into my boot. The tractor had been tampered with. Deep, angry gouges scratched into the paint across the hood and doors. Someone had smeared mud across the panels, jammed trash into the engine compartment, and worst of all, a giant neon sticker slapped onto the windshield screamed, "Removal pending, HOA enforcement." It was a pathetic, amateurish attempt at sabotage, but the damage was still bad enough that the float's schedule was now at serious risk. I clenched my fists, taking a few deep breaths, before I turned and stomped back into the barn to check the security footage. The cameras didn't disappoint. There, plain as day under the glow of the security floodlights, was Karen herself, creeping around the tractor like a raccoon rummaging through garbage. She wasn't alone either. Two of her usual sidekicks were with her, both trying to look tough while nervously glancing around like kids TPing a teacher's house. Karen, in full drama mode, slapped the fake violation sticker onto the tractor with such force it nearly tore in half. Then she threw a handful of dirt at the tractor's tires like some deranged HOA exorcism ritual. I watched the footage twice just to be sure, saving it to 3 separate USB drives for safekeeping. Karen had crossed the line from annoying to criminal. And the best part was, she had absolutely no idea she'd just turned a petty neighborhood squabble into a full-blown felony investigation. I didn't waste time. I called up the state parade committee first. My contact, an ex-cop named Mike who now coordinated event security, answered on the first ring. I explained the situation, sent him the footage, and by the time we hung up, he was already mobilizing a small team. They weren't going to interfere directly yet, but they wanted Karen's actions fully documented. If she tried anything else, the parade lawyers would slam her with charges so fast she wouldn't know what hit her. I also reached out to an old buddy of mine, a retired sheriff named Dale, who volunteered with the committee. Dale laughed so hard when I told him what happened that I thought he might pass out. But he promised to be nearby in case things got uglier. Meanwhile, Karen kept digging her own grave. That same afternoon, she sent out a community-wide email blast through the HOA's mailing list, proudly announcing that she had successfully neutralized a major threat to neighborhood values and restored the peaceful aesthetic harmony of the community. She attached photos of my vandalized tractor like they were trophies of war. The delusion would have been funny if it wasn't so reckless. She had no clue that the float was officially registered as state property, and damaging it wasn't just a petty offense. It was interfering with state operations. Word traveled fast. One of my other neighbors, a sweet retired couple who lived 3 houses down, forwarded me the email with a warning. "Heads up," it read, "Karen's bragging all over Facebook too." Sure enough, I pulled up Facebook and found Karen's page already flooded with self-congratulatory posts. She posed next to the trash tractor like she'd just taken down a mafia boss. I screenshotted everything, carefully archiving her online confession spree. Each post, each comment, each proud little selfie was another nail in her legal coffin. Later that evening, I got an unexpected visitor. Tony, the HOA president, showed up at my gate, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. I could tell immediately that Karen hadn't bothered consulting the board before launching her solo crusade. Tony rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly as I leaned against the fence, arms crossed. "Look, man," he said, voice low, "I had no idea she was doing all this. The board doesn't authorize vandalism. That's not us. We're gonna handle it internally." I almost felt bad for the guy. He was stuck between a rock and a Karen. But I couldn't afford pity right now. "Tony," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm, "this isn't just a neighborhood thing anymore. That tractor is classified as state project property. What she did, that's a criminal offense. And I've got footage, eyewitnesses, and now a paper trail thanks to her little Facebook party. This is way, way bigger than HOA politics." Tony's face went pale. He mumbled something about trying to de-escalate and shuffled off, probably to figure out how to save what little reputation the board had left. As he disappeared down the sidewalk, I locked my gate behind him and turned back to the tractor. There was no time to waste feeling angry. I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed my tools, and started cleaning up the damage. Every scratch, every dent would have to be repaired before parade day, and I wasn't going to let Karen's stupidity derail everything I had worked so hard for. The sun dipped below the hills as I scrubbed mud from the tires and carefully peeled away the fake sticker without tearing the paint. I worked into the night, welding patches, tightening bolts, rewiring light mount. Every clang of the hammer, every hiss of the torch fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fixing a machine. I was building a monument that would roll through the capital streets, celebrated by thousands. Karen thought she could bully me into compliance. Instead, she had given me the perfect excuse to expose her for what she really was, a reckless, entitled fool. By midnight, the tractor gleamed again under the barn lights. Not perfect yet, but strong enough to hold. I leaned against the side of it, wiping sweat from my forehead, and stared out into the dark. Somewhere out there, Karen was probably sipping her 4th glass of wine, bragging about her victory, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet was already crumbling. Tomorrow, things would escalate. I knew her type. Karen wouldn't stop now. She'd smell blood and push harder, trying to get me fined, maybe even trying to get the county involved. But I wasn't worried. The state parade committee was watching. So was the governor's office. Every move Karen made was being recorded, documented, catalogued. I smiled to myself in the warm night air. Karen had no idea she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and very soon, with a little push, she was going to take a fall so epic it would make the 4th of July fireworks look tame by comparison. The morning of the transport arrived hotter and stickier than even July should allow, and with it came the rumble of trouble down the street. I had just finished tightening the final support bolts on the float structure when I heard it, the unmistakable growl of a tow truck, its oversized tires grinding angrily against the road as it rounded the corner toward my property. I wiped the grease off my hands and stood there in stunned disbelief as a battered tow truck, barely big enough to haul a golf cart, pulled up in front of my gate. The company's logo, hastily spray-painted on the door, read "Quick and Easy Towing," and judging by the driver's nervous fidgeting, Nothing about this operation was going to be quick or easy. Behind the tow truck, like a queen overseeing her army, sat Karen in her golf cart, grinning triumphantly like she had just orchestrated the downfall of a nation. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses, her clipboard clutched proudly against her chest like a knight's shield. A few curious neighbors poked their heads out from doorways and windows, whispering among themselves, phones already in hand, ready to capture whatever spectacle was about to unfold. I crossed my arms and leaned casually against the tractor, watching the scene unfold like I was at a front-row seat to a circus act. The tow truck driver climbed out, scratching the back of his neck nervously. He looked at the size of the tractor, then back at his truck, then back at the tractor again, as if hoping it would magically shrink to a manageable size. Karen stormed up to him, jabbing her finger toward the tractor. "There it is. Eyesore violation number 62. Remove it immediately," she barked. The driver hesitated, looking at me for confirmation. I smiled politely and said nothing. Let them make the first move. Let them dig deeper. After a few moments of awkward dithering, the driver pulled out a rusted chain and approached the tractor. He didn't even get the chain halfway around the axle before the weight of the situation, literally, became obvious. The float structural frame, reinforced with heavy-duty metal for the parade features, made the whole rig far too heavy for his cheap winch. As he tried to crank it, the tow truck's front wheels actually lifted slightly off the ground, wobbling comically before slamming back down. The spectators across the street burst into laughter. Karen's face twisted in confusion and rage. "Do it properly!" she screamed at the poor driver, who was now sweating bullets under the pressure of both the July sun and Karen's volcanic temper. He tried again, repositioning the truck, revving the engine desperately. But the tires spun uselessly in the dirt, kicking up clouds of dust and going nowhere. Worse, the heavy vibrations shook the frame of the float, causing one of the welded support bars to groan dangerously. I straightened up immediately. Enough was enough. I stepped forward, voice sharp. "Touch that float again, and you'll be paying for damage to state property," I said, loud enough for everyone, and especially the recording cell phones, to hear. The tow truck driver froze, chain in hand. Karen whirled toward me, her mouth gaping like a fish. "State property?" she spluttered. This rust bucket?" She laughed, a wild, ugly sound that only grew louder when a local news van, tipped off by the parade committee's media team, pulled onto the street, camera crews already leaping out. Reporters rushed toward the scene, microphones out, cameras rolling. Karen, mistaking this attention for admiration, flounced over to them, launching into a breathless rant about community safety and eyesores destroying property values. She dramatically pointed at the tractor as if it were a live bomb she had personally disarmed. I didn't move. I just watched, arms crossed, as the reporters zoomed in on the float structure, the custom-welded frames, the hydraulic systems, and the battered tow truck sagging under its own weight. Then the motorcade appeared. Black SUVs with government plates rolled up the street like a tidal wave, parting the crowd effortlessly. Doors opened, and out stepped a small entourage led by none other than Governor Warren himself, sunglasses glinting, expression unreadable. Karen froze mid-rant, her face draining of color as the governor and his team approached. He didn't waste time. Striding over to me first, he shook my hand firmly. "Appreciate your work on this," he said, his voice carrying easily. "Heard you had some challenges." Karen, realizing the cameras were still rolling, stumbled forward, plastering on a fake smile. "Governor Warren, sir. I was just protecting the community. This man had an abandoned machine ruining the aesthetic of our neighborhood. I took action." The governor turned to her slowly, removing his sunglasses. His gaze could have cut steel. "You took action," he repeated flatly. He looked past her at the damaged float, the struggling tow truck, the dented framework. "You vandalized a classified state project under active construction for the 4th of July parade." Karen blinked. I didn't know," she stammered. "You were warned," the governor said. He nodded toward the sheriff, who stepped forward with a pair of handcuffs in hand. Karen's eyes widened in horror. "This is a violation of multiple state and federal laws," the sheriff said calmly. "You're under arrest for vandalism, trespassing, and obstruction of state operations." The cameras caught every second as Karen shrieked, protested, and ultimately wilted under the realization that her fantasy of HOA domination had just turned into a nightmare. The sheriff cuffed her, and Karen, still babbling incoherently about bylaws and neighborhood beautification, was led away toward the waiting patrol car. The tow truck driver, sensing his own doom, quietly unhooked his useless chain and peeled away before anyone could involve him further. Reporters surged around the governor, firing off questions, while I quietly moved back to the float and began inspecting the frame. It was scratched, but reparable. With a little luck and a lot of elbow grease, we'd still make it. The governor gave a brief statement, praising the importance of community builders and warning about the dangers of unauthorized interference with civic projects. As the crowd buzzed and neighbors stared, I couldn't help but catch Tony, the HOA president, slinking away down the sidewalk, pretending not to know Karen at all. The sun was high and hot by the time the street finally cleared, but the damage was done, not to my tractor, not even to the float, but to Karen's reputation. She wasn't a neighborhood hero anymore. She was a cautionary tale, a laughingstock, a viral moment about to explode across every news channel and social media platform. I stood there, wiping dust off my jeans, feeling a rare and satisfying kind of peace settle over me. Karen had made her move, and it had backfired spectacularly. The float would survive. The parade would go on. And Karen's days of terrorizing the neighborhood were officially and gloriously over. The day after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood was practically humming with gossip. People who once cowered under her reign of passive-aggressive terror were now gathering in little knots on sidewalks and front lawns, talking animatedly. Every few hours, another video surfaced online of Karen being cuffed, crying about bylaws, or the governor sternly rebuking her on live television. News vans still cruised by occasionally, snapping pictures of the infamous tractor and half-finished float, treating it like a local landmark. Meanwhile, I had no time to bask in the chaos. The parade clock was still ticking, and thanks to Karen's sabotage, there was a mountain of repairs to tackle if I wanted to get the float ready for the governor's big event. I spent the morning inspecting the entire frame for hidden damage. Weld joints were checked and rechecked, electrical systems were tested, and every decorative panel was examined for cracks or stress points. The good news was, the main structure had held strong. The bad news was the cosmetic damage. Scratched paint, bent supports, and several broken pieces of trim meant hours of painstaking work ahead. I rolled up my sleeves, tied a sweat-soaked rag around my neck, and got to it. Around noon, just when I was elbow-deep in reattaching the rotating platform bolts, a loud knock echoed from the front gate. I wiped the grime from my hands and stepped outside, half expecting another news crew. Instead, a group of neighbors stood there, awkward and hopeful, clutching toolboxes, paint cans, and coolers filled with lemonade. At the front was Mr. Ellery, the retired Air Force colonel who lived 2 streets over. He cleared his throat and nodded toward the tractor. "We heard you could use a hand," he said simply. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. These were the same people who, a week ago, wouldn't have dared cross Karen for fear of fines or neighborhood blacklisting. Now here they were, offering to patch, paint, and weld without a second thought. I grinned, heart swelling a little. "Only if you're ready to get your hands dirty," I said. They got to work with the kind of fierce energy usually reserved for natural disasters or barn-raising parties. Kids painted touch-up coats under the supervision of grannies wielding paintbrushes like samurai swords. Retired mechanics tuned the wiring. Some of the younger guys rigged extra security lights and double-checked the trailer hitch. Even Mrs. Pearson, who once filed a noise complaint against my rooster, showed up with a box of cookies and a jug of sweet tea, smiling sheepishly as she offered to organize lunch runs. While the float repairs powered ahead, news from Karen's situation started trickling in. Apparently, she was being charged with vandalism of state property, criminal trespass, and obstruction of a public event. Rumor had it that the HOA board had called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to suspend her indefinitely pending investigation. Tony, the president, was seen pacing around the clubhouse parking lot, looking like he aged another 10 years overnight. No one knew if the HOA itself would face legal consequences for enabling Karen, but everyone agreed that her personal reign of terror was over. Late that afternoon, as we hammered the last of the replacement panels into place, Mike from the State Parade Committee showed up with a few trucks carrying spare materials and technicians. He clapped me on the back, grinning wide. "Word got around you could use a little backup," he said. Behind him, a few state engineers and carpenters hopped down and immediately began reinforcing the platform and helping rig the float's special effects. It felt like an army had shown up. By nightfall, the float wasn't just restored. It was better than before. We had added additional supports, reinforced the hydraulic lifts, and upgraded the lighting system. It would now feature a fully choreographed light show timed to patriotic music, ending with a massive rotating sculpture honoring firefighters, police, and veterans. As I stood back, taking in the gleaming platform under the floodlights, I couldn't help but marvel at what had risen from the wreckage Karen had tried to create. But the best surprise came when Mike pulled me aside and handed me a sealed manila envelope. "Governor's idea," he said with a grin. Inside was a letter authorizing me to build a second, smaller float to be used at the end of the parade. A neighborhood heroes float, but with one small twist. This one would highlight community resilience against entitlement and destructive behavior. The idea came directly from the governor after watching the footage of Karen's meltdown. They wanted me to create something that would celebrate real community spirit, and subtly mock the drama that had almost derailed the event. It was genius. I immediately got to work, sketching plans for a float that would feature a giant, cartoonishly oversized HOA clipboard being crushed under the boots of neighborhood volunteers, all while banners flew high with slogans like "Community over Control" and "Real Neighbors Build, Not Break." Over the next 2 days, while the main float received final touches, the second float came to life like magic. Kids painted colorful banners, welders crafted a giant broken gavel symbolizing the death of petty rule, and retired engineers rigged up hidden speakers that would play lighthearted, upbeat music. It was satire, it was celebration, and it was going to steal the show. Meanwhile, the community was buzzing with excitement. People who hadn't spoken to their neighbors in years were now planning potlucks and setting up lawn chairs together for parade day. It was like a dark cloud had lifted. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt like an actual community again, not just a cluster of houses terrorized by one woman's ego. The governor's office made it official. Both floats would lead the parade, with the original tribute float kicking things off in solemn, heartfelt fashion, and the neighborhood heroes float bringing up the rear with energy and humor. I was asked to ride with the governor himself at the start of the parade, while the volunteers rode on the second float, waving and tossing candy to the crowd. As the final night before the parade arrived, I stood under the stars next to the 2 completed floats, listening to the buzz of last-minute checks and laughing children. The floats gleamed in the floodlights, 2 symbols of everything Karen had tried, and failed, to destroy. I thought about everything she had done, every threat, every vandalism attempt, every smug declaration that she was saving the neighborhood. All it had accomplished was bringing everyone together in a way she never could. I knew tomorrow would be unforgettable, not just because of the floats, not even because of the parade itself, but because of the message it would send. You can bully, you can vandalize, you can stomp around with fake authority all you want. But real community? Real neighbors? They stand taller, build stronger, and laugh harder in the face of people like Karen. And tomorrow, with the whole state watching, the final chapter of her story would be written in parade confetti and the deafening roar of applause. Parade day dawned with a sky so bright and blue it looked like it had been painted just for the occasion. From the minute I pulled open the barn doors, it was clear this was going to be bigger than anyone had imagined. Crowds had already begun to gather along the main road, lining up with lawn chairs, flags, and coolers, waving excitedly at every official vehicle that rolled past. News vans were stationed on every corner, reporters bustling around setting up their cameras, and drones buzzed overhead capturing every moment from the air. Both floats sat gleaming under the rising sun, the original tribute float shining with new paint and polish, and the neighborhood heroes float standing proudly behind it, the giant crushed clipboard and banners ready to steal the show. Just before we set off, Governor Warren arrived with his security detail, looking sharp in a crisp navy suit. He walked straight over to me, shaking my hand firmly, and thanked me in front of the assembled crowd of volunteers and workers. His words were broadcast live, his voice booming from the portable speakers set up along the route. He spoke about resilience, about community spirit, and about the importance of standing against those who would try to tear others down for their own selfish gain. I saw more than a few neighbors wipe away tears, and even the reporters seemed moved. When he finished, he clapped me on the back and said, "Time to show them what real pride looks like." I climbed up onto the float's small operator seat just behind the main sculpture, fired up the tractor's engine, and felt the machine rumble to life beneath me. As the parade marshal gave the signal, I pulled forward, leading the way down Main Street to the deafening sound of applause, cheering, and patriotic music blasting from every corner. People waved flags, kids perched on their parents' shoulders hollered with excitement, and veterans stood at attention, saluting as the tribute float rolled by, the massive rotating statue of a firefighter atop it slowly spinning against the perfect sky. The hydraulics unfolded smoothly, the lighting glinted just right, and the entire spectacle felt like a living, breathing tribute to everything good about the community. Riding next to me in the governor's convertible were several of the local heroes featured on the float, including firefighters, police officers, teachers, and doctors. Their presence gave the parade an even stronger emotional pull, and as we passed the review stands where officials and dignitaries sat, I caught sight of some wiping away tears. It wasn't just a parade float anymore. It was a symbol, a statement carved from steel, sweat, and stubborn hope. And it was working. But the real showstopper was still waiting just a few floats behind. As the neighborhood heroes float rounded the bend and came into view, the crowd's excitement turned electric. Laughter and cheers erupted as people caught sight of the giant broken HOA clipboard being crushed underfoot by cartoonish construction boot. Colorful banners reading "Community over Control" and "Neighbors, not Dictators" flapped proudly in the breeze. Kids on the float tossed candy into the crowd while volunteers waved and danced to upbeat, playful music. The energy was infectious. People weren't just enjoying the joke. They were celebrating it, living it. And that's when I saw her. Off to the side, just behind the news vans, Karen stood half-hidden, sunglasses jammed low on her nose, a wide hat pulled over her head in a sad attempt at disguise. But it was no use. People recognized her immediately. A wave of whispers rolled through the crowd, then snickers, and finally outright laughter. A little boy standing nearby pointed straight at her and yelled, "Hey, isn't that the lady who tried to wreck the parade?" Cameras turned her way, and for a moment Karen just froze, a deer in the headlights, as hundreds of eyes locked onto her. She tried to back away, pulling her hat lower, but it was too late. In an instant, she became part of the story she had tried so hard to control, immortalized on every phone and every news broadcast. The governor, noticing the commotion, simply smiled and waved to the crowd, pretending not to see her. It was a masterclass in grace. The parade rolled on, leaving Karen standing awkwardly by herself as the floats and bands and marchers passed by, one after another, a living celebration of everything she had tried to tear down. She looked smaller and smaller with each passing moment, until she finally turned and slunk away, disappearing into the crowd she had once ruled with an iron clipboard. As the final notes of music echoed down the street and the last floats turned the corner toward the city park for the closing ceremonies, I parked the tractor and climbed down, heart pounding with a mix of exhaustion and overwhelming pride. People flooded around the floats, taking pictures, laughing, crying, shaking hands with volunteers. I lost count of how many strangers came up to thank me, to clap me on the back, to tell me how much the parade had meant to them after such a rough year. Some even asked if the Neighborhood Heroes float could become a permanent part of future parades, a new tradition honoring real community spirit. Later that afternoon, during the official awards ceremony, the governor stood on the main stage and announced a new initiative. A Community Spirit Award would be given annually to those who demonstrated outstanding service, unity, and resilience in the face of adversity. The first ever recipient was our neighborhood, the people who had come together, repaired the float, and refused to be cowed by selfishness and arrogance. As part of the award, he unveiled a beautiful bronze plaque that would be installed at the town square, commemorating the spirit of the parade and those who fought for it. When my name was called to come up and accept a certificate on behalf of everyone who had worked on the floats, the crowd erupted into cheers. Standing on that stage, looking out over the faces of friends, neighbors, and strangers who had become allies, I felt something deeper than just satisfaction. It was a kind of peace, a kind of pride, not in the floats or even in the parade, but in the knowledge that, when pushed, real people still chose to stand together. They chose hope over fear, kindness over cruelty, and laughter over bitterness. As the sun dipped low and fireworks lit up the sky, I found myself back at the edge of the field, watching the bright explosions reflect off the polished metal of the float. Around me, families laughed, kids raced with sparklers, and old-timers swapped stories over cold drink. Somewhere in the distance, Karen's house stood dark and silent, the once constant threat of her clipboard reduced to a bad memory and a few viral memes online. I smiled, took a deep breath of the warm summer air, and finally let it all sink in. We hadn't just survived Karen's rampage. We had built something bigger, something better, and we had done it together. No HOA rule, no clipboard, no entitled tantrum could ever take that away. And as the biggest, brightest firework exploded overhead, I realized something even better. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a stronger, louder, prouder community that would never let someone like Karen rule it again.